Hi, I'm Nancy. I'm going to read to you the story of Karen titled 17 Years for a Stealing Hand, Why I Had to Disinherit My Brother. Continue watching to know what happened. It was a Tuesday evening when I walked into my house and found the front door lock shattered. My keys meant nothing. The stillness inside was wrong. Every piece of furniture, every appliance, the curtains, the television, the microwave, gone. My walls were naked, the floors bare. My life had been liquidated by someone I loved. And there, taped to the cold, empty wall, was the confession. A note, written in my little brother Patrick's familiar hand. It said, "We need it more than you do. Thanks, Patrick." But that wasn't the theft. The theft wasn't the sofa, or the television, or the thousands of dollars he and his wife stripped from my home. The real theft, the one he didn't even know he was committing, was far more profound. You see, I had a will, and in that will, Patrick was the sole beneficiary of a trust fund worth a staggering $100,000. He lost his entire legacy, his final, absolute security, for a few $1,000s in used property. The moment I saw that note, the moment I finally understood the truth about him, I made two promises. First, he would go to jail. Second, I would wait 72 hours to deliver the ultimatum that would destroy every piece of security I had ever given him. I have a secret I never told anyone, not for 17 years. It's a quiet secret, buried under layers of family expectation and obligation. But that secret didn't just end my family. It destroyed my brother and, in one afternoon, cost me every single physical item I owned. The most disturbing part of the entire ordeal? It didn't happen by accident. It happened by design. A design I enabled for decades. To understand why I didn't call the police right away, to understand the devastating, cold choice I made, you have to understand the 17 years of sacrifice he had already taken. And what I gave began when I was just 25. Our parents' accident was sudden, devastating, a phone call that irrevocably changed my identity. I was 25, navigating my first serious career steps, thinking about graduate school, and traveling the world. Patrick was 15, a child who suddenly needed a parent, a financial anchor, and a future secured. When I signed those guardianship papers, my life trajectory immediately snapped into two separate, unequal paths. My peers were focused on their own upward mobility. I was immediately chasing a budget that never seemed to balance. I had to learn how to parent a grieving, often rebellious teenager while desperately clinging to my entry-level office job. I quickly realized that Patrick's emotional needs weren't the only burden. The financial one was constant, pervasive, and non-negotiable. There was a substantial life insurance payout, a legacy from our parents. I had a choice early on. I could have sold the family home, liquidated the stock portfolio, and used the proceeds to finance a comfortable life for the two of us. But I made a solemn, private vow. The core inheritance, the largest sum, the $100,000 I mentioned, would remain untouched. It was their gift to him, a promise of his future, and I would protect it, no matter the cost to myself. That decision sealed my fate for the next 2 decades. I couldn't afford to be sick, to fail, or even to pause for reflection. My own dreams of traveling to Italy, of buying an apartment in the city, of focusing on my own career advancement, all were shelved indefinitely. My downtime became Patrick's school meetings. My personal savings became his necessities. I remember wanting a simple new coat. Instead, I used that money to make sure Patrick had the best tutoring available for his college prep. He got the name brand shoes he wanted. I faithfully stuck to the clearance rack. Every morning, I put on the clothes I didn't love and went to the job I couldn't afford to lose. The tragedy is that every single sacrifice I made only served to normalize my own self-denial and solidify his expectations of endless provision. Let's quantify the price, not just in emotional cost, but in cold, hard, documented cash. This is the ledger of my life, a tally of the debt Patrick never knew he accrued because I was determined not to burden him with the knowledge. When I was 28, I finally had $5,000 saved for a down payment on a small apartment, a tiny piece of the world that would finally be mine. That entire sum, every single penny, was diverted to cover his high school expenses and buy him a cutting-edge computer that he insisted he needed for college applications. I waited 10 more years to finally achieve my goal of home ownership. Then came college. I paid for every single credit hour in cash. I refused to let him start his adult life with the weight of student loan debt. To fund this, I took on 2 separate side jobs every single Saturday, not for a semester, but for 4 years straight. I worked when I should have been sleeping, socializing, or resting. This sustained, exhausting labor paid for his entire 4-year tuition, a massive financial weight I willingly carried alone so he could begin his life unencumbered. When he turned 18, he needed a car for campus. I was still driving a worn-out sedan with faulty heat. Patrick got a reliable used sedan, paid for up front, to ensure his comfort and safety. That one gesture cost me close to $12,000. And when he met Gabrielle and decided to marry, I spent over $20,000 on that single wedding day because I truly believed that he deserved to be happy and start his life on a firm foundation. Finally, they bought a house. They couldn't afford the down payment. My savings, the money I had laboriously accumulated for myself for a second time, went directly into their closing costs, a check for $30,000. Add in the regular, automatic mortgage payment I started sending him every month just to keep their heads above water, and the total financial expenditure on my brother's life, paid for directly by the suspension of my own, well exceeded $100,000. Yet, even with all those costs covered through my own sweat equity, the original inheritance remained sacred. The core $100,000 from our parents' estate, the true legacy, was held in a separate trust. I never touched a single dime of it. It was meant to be his unshakable bedrock, his final assurance. And to make that promise legally binding, I had made Patrick the sole heir in my will. This money was so much more than a bank balance to me. It was the final, definitive proof of my unwavering commitment. It was my way of saying to the universe and to our parents, I did it. I raised him, and I secured the future you wanted for him without touching the money you left behind. It guaranteed his financial stability long after I was gone, a reward for navigating a difficult life. He knew something significant was waiting for him, but I never disclosed the exact figure. I thought that was an irrelevant detail. True family, I believed, doesn't base its relationship on the size of a future payout. It's based on mutual respect and love. He had a safety net woven from my own sacrificed years, and a substantial legacy waiting for him. I had honored every single commitment I ever made. But what I saw as a fortress of security, a testament to my duty, others, specifically one other, saw as a potential vulnerability. An unearned luxury that could be manipulated. All that focus, all that financial discipline, had created a lifestyle for Patrick so utterly comfortable, so utterly devoid of consequence, that it invited opportunism. When Patrick married Gabrielle, the simple, focused dynamic of our relationship shattered, replaced by a complex, demanding triangle. My sacrifice was a solitary endeavor, my generosity, a quiet act of love. But now, I had a partner in this equation who saw my self-denial not as a demonstration of familial love, but as a reliable weakness that could be tested. The erosion of our bond, the slow, steady process of taking that would eventually lead to a shattered doorframe and an empty house, began the very day she walked into my home. And she began her campaign by simply failing to return my favorite blouse. The micro-betrayals had begun. The erosion of my boundaries didn't begin with a grand heist. It began with a casual question and a promise that was never kept. Gabrielle started by borrowing my clothes. Since we wore roughly the same size, she'd look through my closet with this air of casual entitlement and pick something out, a nice cashmere sweater, a specific pair of black trousers I'd saved up for, a designer handbag I'd splurged on. I have a work event, she'd say. I'll bring it back next week. But next week will turn into 2 months. And 2 months would turn into silence. The initial annoyance transformed into a deep, unsettling feeling of being taken from. It wasn't the material loss. It was the psychological system of disrespect. I'd have to send a text, always polite. Hey, are you able to drop off the blue blouse this weekend? She'd reply with a flimsy excuse. Oh, I forgot it at my mom's house. Or, I can't find it right now. And then, inevitably, the item would simply vanish from existence. After 6 months, I had lost at least 10 expensive pieces, things I had worked extra hours for. It wasn't just clothing, it was power. It was her testing the limits of my patience and my generosity. Every time I failed to challenge her, every time I accepted the weak excuse, I was telling them, my possessions are disposable. My boundaries are negotiable. I started hiding my nicer things when I knew they were coming over, and the realization that I had to hide my own property from my brother's wife was, in itself, a micro-betrayal. This slow, quiet draining of my resources was her way of establishing dominance, and it served as a preamble to the far larger crime. The emotional breaking point arrived when I finally forced a confrontation. Gabrielle was at my house, admiring a new jacket I'd just bought, and I couldn't hold back the truth any longer. I listed the missing items: the blue blouse, the black trousers, the cashmere sweater. I told her flatly that I wouldn't lend her anything else until I had my own things back. Her reaction wasn't shame, but indignation. Are you serious right now, Karen? You're being so greedy over a few old clothes. And then Patrick walked in. This was the moment I needed my brother to be my family, my ally, the person I had sacrificed everything for. Instead, he became her immediate shield. He looked at me, not with confusion or sympathy, but with annoyance. Karen, come on. Don't make a scandal out of this. You have plenty of clothes. I remember the distinct chill of that moment. I looked into his eyes, searching for the 15-year-old boy I'd sworn to protect, but all I saw was a man who had internalized his wife's entitlement. I pressed him. She never returns anything I lend her. And his voice, so cold and dismissive, delivered the line that became the foundation of all the destruction that followed. So what? You can afford to buy more. That was it. That was the moment Patrick stopped seeing me as a sister, his guardian, his loving family. He saw me as a resource, a limitless well of income that existed solely to cushion his life. The debt of gratitude, the 17 years of sacrifice, it was all erased by that single entitled sentence. I realized that my giving had taught him not appreciation, but ownership. After that exchange, I put up stronger boundaries. I stopped lending, I started making excuses, and they stopped coming over as often. I finally achieved the financial stability to do something entirely for myself. I renovated my home. This wasn't just decorating, it was an act of personal reclamation. I had saved diligently for years. I bought a custom-made sectional sofa designed specifically for my living space, new cabinetry, and high-end, stainless steel kitchen appliances, including the enormous French door refrigerator I had always dreamed of. Every purchase was a statement that my life finally belonged to me. But the renovation presented a choice. My old furniture and appliances, while replaced, were still in excellent condition. Instead of just selling them at a yard sale, I decided to give Patrick one last, unsolicited chance to accept a genuine gift. I called him. Hey, I said. I just got all new furniture and appliances. My old stuff, the couch, the kitchen table, the fridge, it's all perfectly fine. Do you and Gabrielle want it for your place? I was extending the peace, offering a real solution to their struggling budget. It was a test, a moment for Patrick to show basic familial respect. There was a silence on the line, a long, telling pause. And then I didn't hear Patrick's voice. I heard hers. Gabrielle's voice, sharp and undeniable, came through the phone from the background. She hadn't even realized I could hear her. She yelled one sentence. Tell her we don't want her junk. My old furniture wasn't a gift to them. It was an insult. A reminder that they were living off my discards. At that moment, the entire structure of my relationship with them collapsed. They didn't want my charity. They didn't want my hand-me-downs. They didn't want my past. They wanted my life. They wanted the new sectional. They wanted the high-end fridge. My final thought before the line went dead was chillingly clear. The line has been crossed. It is no longer about borrowing. It is about taking. I just didn't realize how quickly or how completely they would come to claim it. I should have known then to check my locks. I should have known that they would come for the things they deemed were theirs. But I didn't. And 3 days later, I walked into an empty house. The day was Wednesday. I had worked late, and the sun was already gone. As I pulled onto my street, the first unsettling thing I noticed was a strange, subtle disruption in the usual evening silence. It wasn't noise. It was an absence of something. When I reached my driveway, I saw the truth, a broken thing that shouldn't be broken. The deadbolt casing was twisted and jutted out awkwardly from the wood. They hadn't used a key. They had forced their way in. My heart didn't pound right away. It simply stopped. There was a terrifying stillness in my chest. I pushed the front door slowly. It gave way, settling slightly ajar. I smelled the sharp, cold air rushing in from the house. Inside, the usual background hum was missing. My refrigerator, the brand new, high-end French door model I had waited so long for, was silent. My mind, still refusing to accept the impossible, tried to rationalize. Maybe the circuit blew. Maybe a pipe burst. I stepped across the threshold, and that's when I felt the first real wave of fear. The floor felt wrong under my feet, too smooth, too hard. There was a scuff mark, a long, deep gouge on the hardwood that could only have been made by something huge being dragged across it. Every instinct screamed, but the truth remained too large to grasp. I walked through the house, my own footsteps echoing back at me, alien and loud. The dining room table where I ate dinner was gone. The chairs, the large, woven rug, everything. I reached the living room. It was an echoing chamber. The custom-made sectional sofa, the perfect fit for the corner, vanished. The television, the stand, the art on the walls. The only things left were the faint, rectangular dust outlines where my possessions used to sit. It was as though my life had been erased by a terrible artist. In the kitchen, the true extent of the malice became apparent. The new appliances were gone, of course, but then I noticed the small things. My pantry was open. They had taken every dish, every bowl, every single one of my pots and pans. They even took the forks and knives from the silverware drawer. They stripped the house of utility and personality. It wasn't a robbery of opportunity. It was a targeted act of malice designed to leave me with absolutely nothing functional. They didn't just want my possessions. They wanted my ability to live comfortably. They wanted to humiliate me. I realized then that they had been methodical. They knew exactly which rooms were renovated, exactly which items were new. My own brother and his wife had driven a moving truck up to my house and systematically stolen the life I had built with 17 years of sacrifice. It was in the living room, taped to the bare plaster wall, near the gouge mark where the sofa had been dragged out. That piece of paper, the confession. I pulled it down, feeling the cheap tape stick to my fingers. I read it aloud, the words catching in my throat. Karen, we took your furniture and appliances to our house. We need it more than you do. You can buy more stuff later. Thanks, Patrick. The sheer, staggering audacity of it. The confidence. The final, casual dismissal. You can buy more stuff later. In his mind, my resources were endless. My sacrifice was mandatory, and his entitlement was justification. He truly believed, with an unsettling conviction, that he deserved this more than I did. That the things I had worked for belonged to him because he was, essentially, a perpetual ward of my wealth. My heartbreak solidified into a cold, unbreakable fury. As I stood there, holding that note, my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, knocked on the shattered doorframe. She was an older woman, quiet and observant. She saw the devastation, and her face went from concern to utter disgust. "Oh, Karen, everything is gone," she whispered. Then, she confirmed my worst fear. "I saw your brother here this afternoon. He had a moving truck." She told me he had waved and lied, claiming I had given him permission to take everything. But then she added the crucial, beautiful detail. She told me she had a security camera pointed right at my driveway, and she had recorded the entire process. In that instant, the fog lifted. This wasn't a personal trauma. It was a legal case. I had irrefutable, time-stamped proof. I didn't waste another second. I pulled up my banking app on my phone. I located the automated $1,000 monthly transfer I had been making to cover Patrick's mortgage. That payment was due in 3 days. I canceled it immediately. That was the first domino. The 17 years of sacrifice were over. Patrick had destroyed his claim to my love, and now I was coming for his security. The clock had started. My 72-hour ultimatum was officially underway. The decision to cancel the mortgage payment was the first step. The next was calling my lawyer, David Chun. David had handled some of my personal affairs, and he listened to the story of the stolen life with mounting disbelief. I laid out the evidence for him. Patrick's note, a written confession of theft, and the neighbor's videotaped evidence of him loading the moving truck. David's advice was precise. We needed to act not with emotion, but with overwhelming legal force. He immediately drafted a formal letter, a document heavy with the language of felony theft, demanding the immediate return of all property. It wasn't a request, it was a deadline. This was the official launch of the 72-hour ultimatum. The letter stated clearly, Patrick and Gabrielle had 3 days, 72 hours, to return every single item, pay for the damage to the lock and the floor, and offer a written apology, or I would file a criminal police report. We sent it via courier to ensure there was no plausible deniability. I looked at the 3-day countdown not as a waiting period, but as a silent, invisible clock measuring the final moments of my relationship with my brother. I wasn't asking for my things back. I was demanding accountability. And in the cold logic of the law, I was starting the clock on their self-destruction. I knew their desperation. I knew they would talk it over, try to justify it, and ultimately try to call my bluff, thinking I would never prosecute my family. I had simply given them a finite window to choose between repentance and ruin. And I settled in to watch them choose ruin. I received no call, no text, and no return of property within the 72 hours. They chose to believe the sister, who spent 20 years sacrificing for them, was all bluff and forgiveness. They underestimated the fury of a woman who had nothing left to lose. On the morning of the 4th day, I walked into the police station and filed the report. I presented the officer with the mountain of evidence, the video, the confession note, the receipts for the stolen property. It was irrefutable. They had committed a clear-cut felony. Just a few hours later, my phone rang. The screen flashed Patrick. I answered on the second ring, holding the phone away from my ear, ready for the explosion. His voice was frantic, ragged, completely stripped of its usual entitlement. He was screaming, "What did you do? The police just showed up. They're detaining us. Are you insane?" I could hear Gabrielle's muffled screams in the background, accusing me of ruining their lives. I allowed him his panic for a moment, letting the sound of his fear wash over me. Then I delivered my response, my voice utterly level. "You had 72 hours, Patrick. You chose not to return my property. You made this choice." He didn't apologize. Not for the theft, not for the note, not for the damage. His only concern was the consequences. He stammered, "Karen, please, just drop the charges. We'll bring everything back today." The arrogance of his assumption that the law was something I could simply turn off with a switch. My final word to him was a simple, cold, absolute rejection. No. And I hung up the phone. The 17-year obligation to him was finally, definitively severed. The subsequent weeks were a flurry of legal preparations. Patrick and Gabrielle were released on bail, having confessed to the bulk of the crime. They struck a deal with the prosecutor, and a court date was set. At the trial, I didn't need to speak much. David Chun presented the evidence, the neighbor's video, the signed confession, the photographs of the empty house. Patrick and Gabrielle sat there looking utterly miserable, their carefully constructed world of entitlement crumbling around them. The judge, clearly appalled by the familial betrayal, delivered a swift and cold judgment. They were sentenced to probation, a criminal record that would haunt them for years, and fined $1,500 each. More importantly, the judge ordered them to immediately return every single item and pay for the damage they had caused to my property. I felt no euphoria, only a grim satisfaction. Justice had been served, but the real damage wasn't to my home. It was to the past. The illusion of family was gone. Seeing the empty truck backing into my driveway later that week, slowly depositing my possessions, item by item, was not a triumph. It was a funeral for my brother. The court order had achieved its goal. My possessions were physically back in my house, but it hadn't settled the deeper score. It hadn't punished the arrogance, the entitlement, or the betrayal that had defined our relationship for years. Immediately after the trial, I went back to David Chen's office. He expected me to sign the closing papers on the case. Instead, I gave him a different instruction, and I looked David straight in the eye and said, "The court order wasn't enough. I have one more thing to take away from him. The final, absolute thing." The immense amount of money I had been protecting since Patrick was 15, the $100,000 I had sworn to my dead parents to safeguard, was still sitting in that trust fund. That legacy was the final piece of leverage I had over him, the last vestige of my sacrifice. I instructed David to draw up the papers immediately. I was going to change my will, and that $100,000 was going to a charity. The inheritance I had protected for 2 decades was about to be weaponized. I had raised him, I had financed him, and now I was going to disinherit him. The ultimate act of severance was about to be delivered. The day I changed my will, I felt something I hadn't felt in 17 years. Freedom. My house was physically intact again, the stolen possessions sitting awkwardly back in place, but the emotional crime was still unpunished. The court had delivered justice, but only I could deliver finality. I sat across from David Chun, my lawyer, and signed the new document. This wasn't about the money. The $100,000 inheritance I was diverting to a local women's shelter was not a financial decision. It was a ritual severance. It was the last legal thread connecting me to the identity of Patrick's guardian. By removing him, I wasn't just disinheriting a brother. I was symbolically destroying the one-sided contract of sacrifice that had governed my life since I was 25. I was reclaiming my future. I instructed David to notify Patrick immediately. I wanted him to know, unequivocally, that the safety net I had woven for him using my own suppressed dreams was now gone. The money wasn't destroyed. It was simply redirected to people who would never be entitled to it, only grateful for it. The moment that notice was delivered to their door, the formal, cold legal notice stating he was removed from the will, I knew it would prompt the final confrontation. It was the only thing I had left that could truly shake his belief in my unconditional servitude. I didn't have to wait long. It happened on a Saturday morning. The doorbell rang violently, followed by loud, panicked pounding. It was them. I opened the door and stood in the gap, not inviting them in, and simply watched them crumble. Patrick was screaming, his face red with rage and disbelief. "You removed me from the will? You can't do that. That's my inheritance. That's my parents' money." He completely disregarded the fact that he was yelling this at the sister he had just prosecuted him for theft. Gabrielle was next. She was leaning against the doorframe, crying, but the tears felt manufactured. She launched into the ultimate manipulation. "Karen, please. We're pregnant. Think about your niece or nephew. Are you going to leave your own family homeless just because of a couch?" I looked at them both. Patrick, demanding what he never earned. Gabrielle, weaponizing a life that hadn't even started. I remained utterly calm. My voice was low, but every word felt like a perfectly placed brick. "I have done nothing to you that you did not start. I provided you with shelter, with education, with a down payment, and with 17 years of my life. That debt was paid in full." Patrick roared. "It's never enough for you, is it? You owe me." I delivered my ultimate final word, letting the weight of my sacrifice finally crush his entitlement. "You repaid me with an empty house, Patrick. You chose that. The debt is paid. The inheritance is gone. I am done. Do not contact me again." I closed the door, slowly, steadily, and locked the new, reinforced deadbolt. As the sound of their screaming faded from my porch, I realized I hadn't just ended a toxic relationship. I had finally ended my childhood vow. The immediate aftermath was quiet, which was exactly what I needed. The first thing I did was install a state-of-the-art security system, not just to keep them out, but as a symbolic act of boundary setting. I had finally learned how to protect myself. The $100,000 inheritance I had protected for 2 decades was ultimately spent, not by Patrick, but by his own choices. It's ironic. He destroyed his claim to it the moment he attempted to steal something cheaper. That money now does good in the world, far away from his entitled grasp. I finally booked that trip I had postponed 20 years ago. I went to Hawaii, and standing there, looking out over the ocean, I realized that my most valuable possession wasn't the furniture, or the money, or the inheritance. It was my self-respect. It was the realization that I was no longer defined by his need, but by my own strength. The house, once empty, began to feel like my own home for the first time. The objects I bought to replace the stolen ones felt different. They were truly mine, untainted by obligation. I have shared this story with you, my entire painful ledger of sacrifice and final, brutal retribution, because I know many of you have your own Patrick. You have that one family member who mistakes your generosity for weakness. This story, the 72-hour ultimatum, how I watched a brother destroy a $100,000 inheritance, is my proof that sometimes the ultimate act of love is also the ultimate act of self-preservation. You can honor your past without sacrificing your future. I want to hear what you think. Tell me honestly in the comments below. When do you stop being a loyal sister and start being a fool? Was I too harsh to file the police report and disinherit him? Or did he leave me no choice? Please like this video if you agree that family should never be a license to steal, and subscribe for more stories about setting difficult, necessary boundaries. Thank you for listening to my final act.